So, hello there. This has been an eventful day so far, and we continue with another great presentation. This is Anton Mukhataev from Russia originally. He works as a game designer at Nine Rock Studio in Bratislava, and he will talk about designing video games with localization in mind, so your games won't get lost in translation. So the stage is yours.
I only see like a smaller number of people than on the previous presentation. It's totally all right because everybody is tired and we just want to get on with the day. You know, there is an after party coming and all this. So we are going to have a clear mental workout where we're going to spend the next 30 minutes figuring out what localization is, why it matters or why it doesn't. But first, let me start by just saying that the topic itself can sound controversial because, you know, how to not let translators ruin your game. What does ruining even mean? Well, does it stand? Can we really ruin video games with inappropriate localization? This is one of the topics that I'm going to cover today, but just also to remind you first a few disclaimers. First, I'm a game designer, but this presentation is going to cover both design-specific subjects as well as design-adjacent. What it means is that I'm going to cover some things that I work personally on each and every day when I work on Wave the Hunter. By the way, some of you may have not checked out the game yet. Feel free to do so in the main hall. And in case you already did, you will have a better idea of what I'm going to describe a bit later. So some of the topics are going to be about adjacent themes that I'm just glad I have some, not authority on, but some knowledge on simply because I do have experience in other areas besides game design. So first, let me also mention that I will approach this topic thoughtfully. I don't want to pretend that localization is something important. It doesn't really matter that much, to be honest. It's important in a way that people who don't know the native language of the developers or the language they are making the game in, it is still important that these people do have an ability to actually play the game, but in reality what matters is making video games fun. And even if I'll show you examples how localization can make video games worse, it is still going to be a tricky situation where it basically drives on whether you think it is ruining or not ruining, if it is bad or not too bad. So my approach is simple. What I suggest is either saving your time or it is going to take very little of your time, so you're just going to safeguard yourself. And finally, there's going to be a quiz at the end. Those who answer it may receive a modest prize, but we will see it is pretty challenging. So, and also to introduce this old man from Fatal Fury who says that your fists of evil are about meet my steel wall of niceness. Very nice old man. The way he challenges us inspires me and others to really think about it, how we approach game development, because sometimes it is like this. It is fists of evil against walls of niceness, and who prevails in the end, we never know. So also I will be, like, some of the things I will say may appear as if I'm making fun of those translations, but I actually will not be doing this because, you know, I mean, those translations, they are from all times. People who made them may have not had a great grasp of English, or they may just have been pressed on time, didn't have enough time to actually work on what they intended. So, and really, I believe in separation between the author and their work. So your work is not you. So when somebody is criticizing your work, they are not criticizing you, they are criticizing the work itself, and it's fine. Sometimes brilliant people produce dumb stuff. That just happens. So let's get us started and quickly cover what we are going to have today. First, it is going to be, can translators ruin your game? So I'm going to show you two examples of how it can actually happen. Second, how can designers help translators? This is an interesting topic because usually it's not brought up because designers are usually not like they do interact with localization companies, translators in certain ways, but often we think of translator versus writer interaction, even though it is often indirect, while designers do have this direct connection. So I'm going to describe how we can use game design tools specifically to aid translation. And finally, what can developers do to protect their games? Here I'm going to cover some safety mechanism that you can design for your game in order to make sure that even if the translation quality that you receive is not up to the level you want, your game will still be in good shape, no matter in which language it is being played. So let us also be welcomed by this fine man from an X-Men arcade game who says by his famous line, "Welcome to die." So, the first question, can translators ruin video games? It's a hard one, but let's see how it goes. There is this famous video game that came out in 1997 called Final Fantasy VII, beloved by many. In this video game, we see some interesting translation choices. Mainly, they were the result of those people simply neglecting that translation needs actual time and resources, because the game was released in January in Japan, and then it came out in autumn in the United States, and it was, I believe, translated by one person within a very short amount of time and with little to no context. So sometimes unfortunate choices appear, and here I'm not going to discuss like grammatical errors or other things. I'm going to discuss things that actually discourage people. So here on this screenshot you see the line saying attack while its tail is up. So here is this mechanical scorpion, it has its tails up. So if we see the next line that follows it, it says it's gonna counterattack with its laser. Interesting thing is that the exclamation mark in the first part of this sentence makes us think that actually if we attack it with its tails up, it is going to be good. But in reality, if you've played Final Fantasy VII, you know that this attack is going to ricochet on you, and the monster will counterattack you, and it is going to be a problem. So for some kid who doesn't really, let's say they have to play in English, but they don't really speak English that well, they just see words attack, tail up, and they decide, well, let's attack it, and that's how they end up with it. So what happens in those cases is we may actively mislead players by improper translation. And this is what happened here, because if we check out the original, it says Shippo o ageteiru toki ni kogeki suru to. What goes next? Reza de hangeki shite kuruzo. And it roughly translates into, if you attack while its tail is up, it will counterattack you with a laser. So completely opposite meaning, actually. And it is basically what the English translator wanted to convey, but because of the unfortunate choice of the exclamation mark put at the end of the first part of the sentence, it appeared as though the correct behavior here should be attacking the player. And that's what happened. But you may rightly ask, what? It is an old game. Why are we talking about an old game? It's been 25 years, lots of progress in translation, in localization. We have now those companies who cover this stuff, so why does it matter? Well, let me show you an example from earlier this year that I experienced personally while working on Way of the Hunter. So, and to illustrate this example, I have to give some of you my background here, because when I started working on the game, I didn't know anything about hunting. In fact, I'm just an urban kid, so hunters for me are aliens, essentially, some bloodthirsty people who just want to hunt, harvest, and whatever they want to do. I sometimes just don't understand those motivations, really, but for me as a game designer, it kind of is the point of research that I actually did. So when I did, I realized that hunters actually do have ethics. And those ethics is something that Way of the Hunter is built around, and also something that really matters to hunters. So I would say that some people say that ethics is something not that is a moral, they like to have this position of moral superiority, but it's not actually intrinsically important to them. But in this case, we see that ethics do matter to people. So one of those key aspects is animal age. And the idea is simple. The older the animal is, the better it is to hunt. It is a bit simplified here, but that's the general idea for you, for those of you who may not have an idea of what is going on here. So hunters target older animals, and it actually happened before I joined the team, so I'm grateful to be able to say, standing here, that it was a brilliant decision to divide all those animals in our game into 3 categories: young, adult, mature. Notice that the third stage is called mature and not old, specifically so that you hunt for mature, mostly developed animals who have already contributed to the genetic pool of their species and do actually, they may be harvested, and it is more ethical for hunters than hunting for younger or even young adult, let's say, animals, because in this way they are actively hunting the genophond. So what happens? So I start working on the game, and one day, when I tested it, I noticed, oh, look, there is this very handy tool, because when you use binoculars in the game to look at animals and spot them, you have this handy pop-up when the so-called hunter sense is enabled that shows you different parameters on the animal. Very helpful when you only start out. And one of those key parameters is age here. So let's say we are spotting an animal that is adult. Good. Next, we have a mission objective, and this is something from the first DLC. So it says harvest 2 mature Roosevelt elk. Okay, we want to go and we want to harvest them. But what happens if we are playing the game in French, where it says, pardon my French, prélevé du wapiti de Roosevelt adulte? I'm not sure if I read it right, but the idea is that the word used here is kind of similar to the word you saw in English, and the problem here is pretty simple. Not every language that you would know actually has a good standout difference between adults and matures. It's something that English features and something that we used because the English language is the basis of our game, but in many other languages it can be poorly translatable. So what happens is that when translators start working on the game, at first they actually see that, oh, look, we have those 3 words, very fine, we are just translating them and we are using different terms. No issues at all. But then, here is what happens. When people start playing those missions in other languages than English, when translators do forget what the problem is, when people find out that, oh, look, I was supposed to harvest a mature animal, but the mission objective said harvest an adult animal, because there is now no distinction for them, like in their language at least. And what it exactly means is that some people just cannot complete missions, so they start to get confused and agitated. And we are being honest, we mostly have a very good community of players, so they are going to help us. And in this case, like let's say this person was playing in Czech, and they were able to figure out that, look, there is an inconsistency in Czech language, it is incorrect, but when he switches to English, he sees that in Czech it was the Czech word for adult, while in English we actually meant mature. So this inconsistency, this guy says, look, it is wrong translation. But I would argue that he is not right. It is bad design, actually, because we as designers, we failed to provide translators with good context. We just never actually we never focused on them making sure that when they are translating our game, they always should make sure that each design term is actually consistent across all languages, all types of game. So here what we have is the answer that is inconclusive, I would say, but it is still the answer that I honestly came up with. Can translators ruin your games? unlikely, but yes, and only if designers don't stop them. So I don't want to put the blame on translators, really, because most of them do really want to do a good job. They often don't have the resources to do it, but they have the ability, they have the passion. So we, as game developers, should provide them help in order for them to find a way and see how actually our game works, because not every translator is supposed to be an expert on video games, or even if they are not on particular game they are currently translating, that's perfectly fine. So my next question is, what can we exactly do to help translators as designers? So my approach here is divided in 3 main areas. First, we do preparation and sharing of design documentation. This is important because often design documentation is not in a good state to be shared, but if we actually expect it to be shared with people outside of our company, we should just make sure that, look, it is in a state where we can actually show it to people and they won't be totally confused. They will be just a little bit confused. Next, we are going to discuss automatic checks of formatting and consistency. And this is something I came up with fairly recently. Essentially, we have a set of tools that automatically checks all strings that go inside the game and makes sure that everything is formatted and consistent properly. And not even in the English translation, but also in other languages as well. And not in the English translation, of course, the English version, and other languages as well. Because look, of course, the approach depends on the company. If you have a bigger company, usually the localization process is more rigid and strict, and you wouldn't be able to make those changes and suggestions easily. When you work in a smaller team, it's not really a problem, so often you can just go on and fix an issue that you found. And we're kind of somewhere in the middle in this regard, so we both have the strict, rigid process, but we can adjust it somehow to fit our needs. And finally, I will also identify some localization red flags that you should look for early in the project. First, preparation and sharing. What kind of documents should we actually prepare? I would argue there are 3 documents. It is design vocabularies. I'm shortly going to describe what it is. Translation notes, localization guide, and here we are. Yeah. And this is a nice screenshot for those of you who are tired from this day. Don't be like this person, don't feel asleep. Metal Gear, the first one, Kojima's first masterpiece, great game, introduced stealth to video game design language. So let's get started with design vocabularies. And here I'm going to base my explanation on a fairly recent video game released 1 week ago that I've already completed, called Super Mario Bros. Wonder. So in this game, I'm introducing it based on this game because Mario games are fairly easy to parse, even for people who don't really play them a lot. This is an overview of the one of the game worlds. So you travel between levels, and when you approach each level, you have this pop-up that mentions the title of the level, the collectibles of the level, the difficulty of the level. You also have in the left top left corner of the screen, you have those collectibles and also lives that are technically collectibles, but we're going to get into this later. And so all this is all the information we're going to need basically based on this screen. So look, design vocabularies, what it is. Essentially, it is all design terms you use in your design documentation as a vocabulary, just listing those words and describing, defining what they actually mean. And those words include mostly entities and player actions. They can be nouns, they can be adjectives, they can be verbs. And finally, there are 2 versions. I would usually prefer to refer to them as internal and external, but I also use my made-up terms feature vocabulary, which is like a bigger version you actually keep in your internal company documentation. It is a comprehensive version of what you have in the game. And then there is a content vocabulary that is an adjusted player-facing vocabulary that you're actually going to share with your external partners like translators. So for this, let me just show you the examples really, because they will, it will make more sense after I show what it actually means. So look. For example, what difficulty is in this latest Mario game? Difficulty describes how hard it is to complete level with rating ranging from 1 easier to 5 hardest stars. And the idea here is that first, I'm underlining each word that is a design term, because completing a level in this particular game actually means something. It means that you reach the flagpole. Sometimes there are 2, but those are exceptions that are like worth the actual Nintendo documentation, not my explanation here. So we have rating. Difficulty rating is based on stars. It can be from 1 to 5. We have those stars that are visual representation, and I always actually advise to have some kind of visuals backed up into your design documentation plan, because without them, reading walls of text is just not fun for anyone on the team, and it's just hard to keep up sometimes. Next, let's say level. What level is? I would define a level in a Mario game as a space, or like in general in most video games, to be honest, as a space where player completes objective, or objectives, if there are more than one. Next, main collectible. Main collectible is an item that the player obtains to progress in the game. Again, item and player are underlined. To jump. What is to jump, like when we are already inside the level? To jump is to move player character higher in an accelerated burst. And it is interesting really here, because in Mario games, you can also do like a wall jump. There are sometimes different types of jumps when, let's say, we come to 3D Mario games. So the definition of jumping may vary, and the important idea here is that you would want to define verbs that don't actually convey the same thing that we convey in real life. Because when you are jumping, in real life you usually have some kind of ground below you. But in video games, sometimes you do not. Sometimes you double jump. And in this case, you have ground somewhere, but it's kind of far away, so you can never be sure. Next, we have breakable. It is some kind of an environment object that player character can break with jumping and other actions. So we can also define those actions below, but for the means of this presentation, I'm omitting it. So now look, we're going to turn this feature vocabulary into a content vocabulary. And here is what we can theoretically do with it when we compose this player-facing vocabulary. First, we can call level a stage. In this case, for example, for some reason, we don't want to use the word level because the word level is already occupied by, let's say, difficulty level or some other level, and we don't want to reuse this word too many times. So we would call game levels, spaces, we would call them stages, just to be more clear for players. Main collectible. In the actual game, it is called Wonder Seed. And we can also define that Wonder Seed is a collectible item players receive when they complete stage objectives, such as finishing stages or a Wonder Flower sequence within the stage. I'm not going to go here too deeper into the details, but still. Next, only include the words that have some kind of a context-dependent or special meanings. What it means is that if the word means the same in real life as in your game, there is no usage in defining it. Just go alone and continue. But if it does, it is worth mentioning. And next, as an example, lots of objectives in Way of the Hunter have this word to harvest. And by harvesting, we usually mean that you shoot an animal and you go and gather it essentially, and then you either sell its meat or you make a taxidermy out of it. So. And for our players, the verb to harvest after a first few missions actually means something, and they are able to process this chain of actions very effectively because we define this verb and we try to stick to it and use it across the game in all objectives. But such thing as to jump or breakable, they can be omitted from content vocabulary because they may never be actually mentioned in the game itself. You only need it as a game developer. You need it for yourself, you need it for programmers, you need it for artists perhaps. By people who are inside your company, they may need to know what a breakable object is, but players really do not unless you specify it in tutorials. Next, translation notes. So with translation notes, it's kind of interesting because you would expect people do them, but often they don't, and we are kind of sometimes also don't do it, unfortunately, because of different stuff, but we want to resolve to be better at this. And the thing is, when I speak to translators, one thing that they tell me is that any kind of notes in any kind of formatting is better than no notes, because for translators, the most important thing is context. If they don't have any, translations will severely lag. So this is probably the most important thing here. Do make some notes. The format really doesn't matter as long as it's there. It's a good start, especially in case where you don't make them, and sometimes people do not. So in those cases, you can also see an interesting reality where you can actually reuse a lot of what you already do, because if your game has, let's say, voice acting, then there are some notes already, because I don't know how you're interacting with voice actors if you don't make any direction for them. Like, it, of course, depends on your team setup. Sometimes, potentially, you can do it, but I mean, seriously, I would suggest you should, like, if you have voice acting, you probably have notes, and you can reuse them. They will be also very useful to translators, and then you can note down only the parts that are not acted on by your actors. So next, if you don't make if you don't make the notes, please make them. And also, if you don't have voice acting, well, still make notes for translators. It's useful for you, it's useful for them. And it takes surprisingly little time. And yeah, as I've already mentioned, context is king for translators. So next, I'm going to illustrate it by a small, nice, in quotes example, but a famous one from the single-player campaign of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. So there is this famous interlude level called No Russian, and there is a certain line in this level where one of those terrorists says, "Remember, no Russian." So the thing is, in the Japanese version, it was translated as "Korose Rossiya Zinda," which I would kind of translate it into "kill them, they are Russians," or "kill Russians." But while you can gather this meaning from the original translation, the actual reality and the actual intent was that the author of the script wanted to say that, look, just don't use Russian language. But since it can be treated both ways, what probably happened is either there was no note specifically on this one, or the Japanese translator missed it somehow. But anyway, it's a touchy subject. So, I mean, if you have some kind of touchy subjects, why wouldn't you include those notes and make sure that they are actually translated properly? So, interestingly enough, in 2020, when, like, I forgot to change the year there, but actually it's the remastered version. So in the remastered version, you can notice by nicer shadows, a generation of improvement. It now says "Ika, Rossiya go va Tsukauna." So it means that essentially, look, don't use Russian language. So now it conveys the original meaning, but it took 11 years. So what it actually means is that just give context to translators. They really need it. And I also like to include a certain document I call Localization Guide. Essentially, it's everything translators would need. The vocabularies I described before, all the notes, general notes, I mean, because you also, of course, will have some notes that are specific for the lines that you are sending to them. And I would also suggest some style guiding. They can also have their own styles. It depends on them, but really the important thing is it should be mentioned there. Keywords and character limits, I will mention them a bit later. Notes on each category, so you have, like, let's say, level names. Make sure that you tell people how you actually want to name levels and why you do it this way. And include a changelog, because if you don't include a changelog, what can happen is if you update the document, how would people who only see it, let's say once in a few months, will actually see what is new now. So this is a good way of letting them know what changed. Next, finally, the next part is what can developers do to protect their games? So let's say we now take translators out of the equation for a while and just see what we can do ourselves to make sure that there are no issues like this. First, I will describe our text import pipeline, then we will do some formatting, checking what it actually means inside both this presentation and what we do in this game. And also we'll go over some experimental currently spelling suggestions stuff that I'm working on. So, and also, yeah, ideally you wouldn't have this I'm error thingy popping up in your game. So look, we have this pipeline where rule 0, I would say, is do not import unless you really need to, because lots of imports can lead to lots of errors. Ideally, you don't need to do it like each day, you do it on some kind of a regular occasion. It would be better this way. So next, set up some kind of a master spreadsheet with editing rights and data validation. Fix some of the errors there. Don't wait until the mistake pops up in your game, localization QA notices it, sends you a bug report, and you have to fix it. All those people are involved. Fix mistakes before they appear. And also, ideally, you should have only one source of all your text string data. If you have multiple, let's say your project has some hard-coded values, you are going to eventually encounter issues, believe me. Next, what we also do is checking key names for duplicates and consistency. This is an interesting point in Unreal Engine, because in Unreal Engine, when you import CSVs with string table for string and turn them into string tables, what happens is that if you have duplicate keys, the engine will not tell you actively that you have duplicates. It will only import the first one and will forget about everything else. So once it happened to us that we had a duplicate key and the line wasn't translated and we found out it too late. So be sure to do some kind of checking. Next, check string values, formatting, consistency, and spelling. So what we do here is that we have a set of tools developed in Python that simply makes those automatic checks and makes sure that our casing, our naming conventions, the way we format sentences, the way we format titles, everything is the same across the project. And we check it both in the original language as well as in translated languages. And in cases where, let's say, translators made mistakes, we just let them know, look, please fix this. It is not appropriate. I think you made a mistake here. And it generally helps. Sometimes we do find out issues. And yeah, finally, we format spreadsheets. Unreal requires a bit of adjustment usually to be properly, so that we can properly implement stuff there. So next, what formatting checks usually are? Those checks that we do are for invalid characters, things like special characters, let's say, or invisible characters sometimes screw with us. Punctuation marks, those can be automatically checked. Things like double white spaces that sometimes can lead to unintended issues, and so on. Next, we do some missing symbols in symbol pairs checks. These are one of my favorites. The thing is, sometimes when people translate stuff, they can start with a circular bracket as an opening mark, and then follow it by a closing bracket that is square, and that could be a big issue. So in those cases, what we do is also say, look, there is an issue, please fix it. Sometimes we can just tell people what it is, and they will quickly fix it, thankfully, so that's how it works. And next, naming, capitalization, casing, I already mentioned. Ideally, you have some kind of a standard defined in your localization guide. We have character limits. This is really important because let's say when you upload achievements to PlayStation Store and Xbox Live, what can actually happen is that, let's say you have some wordy language, for example, I don't know, like, not wordy, I would say character, a language where there are a lot of characters like German or let's say Polish. So what can happen is that in those languages you will have you will go over the limit, and your translation will not actually be approved. So it can be a huge issue because it is often done very late in the process of developing a game or a DLC, so it can screw things up. Make sure that translators do follow those counts. Unfortunately, sometimes they may not have time to check, or they made some quick fix and forgot to check for character limits. Stuff happens. Next, consistency checks. Well, we'll go quickly through this. It's essentially what I already mentioned. Those design terms, those design terminology, also story terminology, if you want to also work with your writers on this, you can analyze them quickly, pretty easily. You can also, like, if you know programming languages, you can do it yourself, or you can ask your programmers on your team to do it. It is actually not that hard to do. Parsable keywords, in case you have any keywords in your strings, what you just do is make sure that they are consistent across different languages, because sometimes what happens is people can use automatic tools for translation, and they will translate your keyword that is not supposed to be translated along with the actual text that is supposed to be translated. And in your game, the actual players will see those keywords, and it will be terrible. So just make sure that those are consistent across all language versions. And finally, also define words that should not be translated. It could be those keywords. It can also be, let's say, you named a certain area after a certain native tribe. You feel really smug about it. And when you do it, just let people know, like, look, this is this specific name, and we want to also follow up with it in other languages. So this is what we always do. Like, not always we try to do it. But still, the next point is missing and inconsistent key names. I already mentioned it, but still. But what you should do is make sure that three sources of your text data, that is your project, what is in the engine, your localization database, what your translators or your localization company works with, and the master spreadsheet, the one where that is the origin that is defined initially, they should be consistent across all those like three formats. So make sure that they always are, because if some of them goes rogue, things can get like unhandy very, very soon. So yeah, and sometimes it can still happen that the line gets, I don't know what was even the meaning here, but the line got away. That's a pretty famous JRPG from the 90s, Breath of Fire 2 for SNS. So now, look, the thing is this number, and I feel really kind of silly proud about this number, because what happened to us is we didn't have some of those processes before. But when we started using automatic checks, what we realized happened was that between our first DLC for Way of the Hunter, or Our Shores, and the second DLC, Tikamon Plains, we received 70% less bug reports from Localization QA. Of course, it is more of a correlation than causation here. I can't prove to you that all those automatic checks are what actually made it possible, but still, it is a number you cannot simply ignore, because those DLCs actually do have comparable amounts of text, so you can easily compare them. That's what I did on Jira, and that's the number that I found out. The actual number is like 68%, I believe, but 70% looks more fancy. So next, we have spelling and suggestions. So this is experimental stuff, but currently I just use some of Python libraries to suggest to me that, look, while there is no rule broken, it may be either having an incorrect spelling, or there can be an inconsistency between certain elements of the localization database, or, for example, a certain translation uses certain words too much. So we can also look into it, send it to translators, and see what they say. They can be often very open to feedback. So like, you shouldn't be worried about bothering them, because they always, like, when they can, they want to do a good job. And if you actually make their job easier, they will repay you with kindness and make better translations and accommodate for your needs when you need to. And yeah, it is very experimental still, so I don't want to dwell on it too much. We already are out of time. So I will not even take this break. It is going to stay as an Easter egg, but let's go over red flags quickly. First, we have translation notes. Make them early. The earlier you start them, the better it is. If you start them too late, you are going to be bothered by your large corpus of text. It is going to be awful. Next, if you have no visuals along with your text, and those visuals can be just screenshots from your game, it can be videos, you can just share a build. If you don't do those things, there is a higher probability that you will have translation issues. Let people play your game in any form. Like if it doesn't crash every 5th or 10th minute, it's great. People are going to still gather something about your game, and your translation will improve. I'm certain. Next, character limits. As early as possible, start defining them. Because when you do it, you can encounter issues like, let's say, you're German or other language, I don't want to pick on German in particular, may be problematic. Let's say in this certain language, this element is not displayed correctly. So what you can do is pick your original language, translate it into all languages that are supposed to be in your game, and you will find out that some UI or other elements break. You can do it early, and you can do UI fixes early this way. Next, no considerations for non-European languages. This is a huge red flag, because this is something I also want us to improve in the future, because let's say there is Arabic language that is right to left, and when you are making a UI and you know that you are going to have a right to left language, you need at least to think how you handle it. So it doesn't really matter that, like, you shouldn't immediately have some kind of a solution for it, but you should at least think and consider. That will be enough early, in the early stage, and then you will see. But you should do those considerations. Also, just check how your game looks in Japanese. If you will have Japanese, how it looks in Chinese. You will probably have Chinese eventually. You can also receive fan translations potentially from languages that are not as popular, widespread, but still you want to make sure that your game works in as many languages as possible, and nothing is broken essentially. And next, if you don't have non-localizable texts marked, it is going to bite you eventually, because translators may translate those and you will have to retranslate. I also suggest when you make references, jokes, slogans, whatsoever, any kind of special text elements, a really good idea is make a note. I know that when you make a joke and you explain it, it kind of loses its value. But I mean, seriously, we are about translating video games for players. And if we do it for players, it doesn't matter if we explain it to translators. Because I used to receive so many questions, and I still do, like, is it a joke? Is it a reference to this thing? So if I just do this work in advance and say, look, yeah, this is a reference, this is a reference, you can do it this way. It is usually okay and not a problem at all. I mean, translators are smart people, really. They do get what we write and why we write it, and they are also writers, kind of. Well, not kind of, they are writers on our teams. So it makes sense to explain stuff to them. Essentially, even if it is sometimes over-explanatory, don't worry about it. And the final batch of red flags is, first, too many similar strings with slight alterations. If you have those cases where you have lots of similar strings that have a word or two different, I suggest try using some kind of an approach with keywords. Discuss it with your writers, with your programmers, but essentially, the less you give people to translate, the better the result is going to be. Next, no parsable keywords and pronouns. It kind of connects to the previous point. I suggest try to send as little as possible and get better results. Next, no alterations for numericals. This is also a connected point, and something I suggest you do for languages where, let's say, a noun can be different based on whether it is 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, like, let's say, Slovak sometimes is. Next, no voiceover notes and translation notes. Again, translation notes are important. Please provide them to translators as early as possible, and your actors should be treated nicely as well. Controversial subjects, I already covered it. and no technical localization pipeline. It is actually point number one, something you go with and discuss with your team very early in the project, just how in general will your localization process is going to be structured. If you don't know the language or other specific, it's fine. You still should realize what kind of solution you are using, how it is going to work, and so on. Okay, one more thing. I honestly think that translators and localization QA testers, and to be honest, QA engineers in general, they are not treated in this industry properly. We often see that rates go lower for them. They have often terrible job conditions. They go through vast amounts of work, and it is, like, to be honest, quite terrible for them sometimes. So look, I suggest that at very least, we should credit them all, because it often happens sometimes that translators and LQA, QA engineers are not listed in video games at all. It does happen. It's kind of disheartening, but it is still an issue. Next, we should actually actively speak about them having better working conditions. I can't personally just improve them myself, but if we speak out about it, I think it will help, because it is how it was with other issues. We speak out about it, and it helps. And yeah, better treatment, that's all true. And also we should explain to our player base what kind of jobs these are, what they mean, and so on. So there is no unnecessary harassment and other inappropriate stuff that unfortunately sometimes still happens in this industry. And finally, yes, I encourage you to speak out about it. So let me know how much time do we have, because we can skip on this one or like anything. But in general, I will go back to this point, but first, these are my contacts. This presentation, I mean, I covered a lot in a very short amount of time, but I'm always glad to explain our process to other people, so you can contact me anywhere you like or any way you like, by email, LinkedIn, Discord, doesn't matter to me, to be honest, just the way you prefer. And like, thanks for listening. I hope it was educational. Thanks. So how much time do we have now?
7 minutes till the next session.
Uh-huh.
So just a quick.
Yeah. Okay. So do any of you recognize these and like one of those ending screens? What game is for each one? Like at least one of those. 5, 4, 3. Again? Yeah? Okay, we will do it next time. If you have any questions, some questions? Yeah?
Yeah, I ask,
yeah, sure.
when you work with translators and you need to provide context for the scene or what's happening, do you provide them with some documentation, or do you have them play the game?
Yeah, so I came in the process of developing this game quite late, because the game was about to be released. I mostly work on the first 2 DLCs, and at this point we had a translation team that was already like accustomed with the game, so we didn't have this issue. Really, we didn't have to show them the game again, so I don't really know how it worked in this regard, but it is in general good practice. Answering your question about context and scenes, well, sometimes it is just a text note for each string that you send, just as you would do with voiceover or voice acting notes. This is the same. Essentially, you have a separate column in your string table that is not parsed by the engine, but is actually sent to translators when they receive it, so they can read it for each line that does need it. And also, we have a general documentation that describes all general cases across the whole project. So they are covered in all of it, all of these instances, but regarding playable builds, I honestly don't know how it was for the main game, to be honest, so can't tell you.
Okay, I guess that we can have one more question. Anyone? Just raise your hand and I will come with mic. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Basically, I don't have a question, but I would like to thank you, Anton, for a great presentation. And also, I would like to thank you for now understanding that 25 years ago, when I was playing Final Fantasy, I wasn't actually dumb, but it was just a wrong
Exactly
translation.
same thing happened to me. Yeah. I was really angry at that point.
So any other question? In that case, thank you guys for coming for this talk. Thank you, Anton, for having this talk, and have a break and see you in a few.
Okay, thank you.